Hi everyone, my name is Tamara and you are watching Things Even a Monkey Should Know. Welcome! Thank you so much for watching again today. As you know, if you've watched some of my other videos, I'm not a professional anything except artist, but I have figured out that there are a lot of things around my house and out in the yard and sometimes on my cars that I can do myself, and it usually saves me time, money, and aggravation. So hopefully you benefit from my experience and save those things too. So today we are doing part 2 of rejuvenating or revitalizing or reviving, whatever you want to call it, a kitchen or a piece of furniture or whatever it is that you have that is made out of wood that you want to paint. So today is the actual painting process. Hooray! So let's go over the stuff that we're going to need today. The first thing is you need to not wear your Sunday best. As you can tell, I am not, because it is amazing how paint can jump out of that can and onto your clothes without a second thought, and you hadn't even done anything but look at it. I promise it happens. The next thing you're going to need is your door or your cabinets or your furniture or whatever it is that you got prepared from our last episode. You're also going to need a space that's relatively clean. Not relatively, you're going to need a space that's clean and where you can leave your things and they won't be disturbed, because this paint does take a long time to dry and it needs to be able to dry without your stuff being moved around a whole lot. You can also see that I have a prop to go underneath my door. I really like to have that so that I can make sure that there's no paint that drips down around my edges and I don't wind up with any ugly drips. The next thing you're going to need is a really good brush. Don't cheap out on the brush. You've done all this work, don't get a cheap brush, because it'll leave hairs in your paint, and I promise you, you won't see at least one of them until your paint's dry, and then that causes a whole slew of problems. So I really like these blended polyester brushes, and my favorite is this kind that has this tapered end like this, because excuse me, because it makes it really easy to get into the corners and into all the little crevices where there's this sort of fancy woodwork going on. You will need a good soap to wash your brush out. I've used Dawn for a long time. You can use whatever you want. I've just found that it seems to get paint out better than anything else I've ever tried. And I've even tried regular shampoo and conditioner and everything on my brushes, because, I mean, even though these are synthetic, they're a lot like your hair. The next thing you're going to need is something, well, first you need something to open your paint can with. You can also use a flathead screwdriver. Then you're going to need something to close your paint can with. And I like a mallet because it doesn't damage or dent the can around the top lip whenever you go to close it. You can also use a hammer with a piece of wood so that, again, so that you're not like putting dents in that top lip, because that's what makes paint cans not close very well. You're going to need something, wow, that's warped. You're going to need something to stir your paint with. Even if you very recently got your paint, you should always still stir it before you use it. Some of those pigments can settle. And then the last thing is you need some paint. So you need to choose your paint color. You should get a primer that is slightly tinted with that paint color, because it'll make it easier to cover. And you guys, I am not getting anything for telling you how great this Benjamin Moore paint is, but this is what I would actually recommend. And I'm not gonna lie, this stuff is expensive, but it goes a long way, and the finish on it is the best that I have ever seen on paint. Not to mention that somehow these scientists here managed to create a water-based paint, so that means it's not fumey like oil-based stuff is. They made a water-based paint and primer that can cover polyurethane and oil-based stuff. So normally you have to have something really fumey and nasty in order to cover what this door is finished with, and if you get the Benjamin Moore Advanced Waterborne Interior Alkyd line, you do not. So there's no bad fumes, and the final finish on this is beautiful. And once it's completely dry, it's it is like a shell on the cabinets, and you can clean it, you can scrub it, and I haven't had anything yet that has stuck to it. So it's great. So that's what we'll be using. So we are going to start by opening our primer, which I know mine is going to need to be stirred because I haven't used it in probably a couple months now. No, it doesn't look as bad as I thought it would though. Or it's not as separated as I thought it would be, but it's still somewhat separated. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a good stir. Now I do want to reiterate to you all that whenever I say that this is an extensive process, I'm not kidding. I'm not talking hours, I'm talking like days. And I guess you could speed it up, but I don't see why you would want to, because there is the great potential of causing damage to all your hard work and the finish on your paint, so I wouldn't do it. So again, we're using primer first, and I like to actually start with the back side of these doors because whenever I flip them over to the front, if the back side happens to not be quite as dry as it needs to be, then well, if there's a mistake on the back, it's not nearly as noticeable as the front, because the back is not what you see most of the time. So we're going to go ahead and paint the back side with the primer. And after you paint this, you want to let it dry. Well, let's say that you painted this side in the morning. You could come back in the afternoon, flip it, and paint the front side. But you're going to see on here, you want to paint with the grain. So this is different than sanding, right? I mean, if you're hand sanding, you want to sand with the grain. But if you paint just all over the place like this, that is going to produce a really ugly finish. So don't do it. Unless that's what you're looking for, in which case, do it. So let's go clean our brush for the first time. So have I emphasized well enough yet how important it is to thoroughly clean out your brush? So I shampoo it basically until I no longer see any white in the water. And usually that takes about 3 rounds of my soap, washing, shampooing, and then rinsing, and then soaping again. So let's see. So that's not too bad. It only took 2 shampooings to get the paint out of my brush, but that's probably just because I only did the back side of one door with the primer. So if you're priming a whole lot of stuff, you're probably gonna have to wash your brush out a little more than that. So you see how this has an uneven finish on it? That's okay. It's not a problem because we don't need the primer to have a full smooth coat. Now, in spite of what I told you about getting an expensive brush, it seems that my expensive brush has decided that it's going to shed hairs today, so that's lovely. It actually, since it's so dry today, it only took about half an hour for this to dry, but let's say that you did not feel exactly good about turning this over on your prop. You could use ordinary wax paper from your kitchen and just put wherever your prop is going to contact your door or your piece of furniture or whatever, and then turn it over, and then you won't have any sticking problems for sure, but this is already really dry. So primer dries way faster than paint, if I didn't mention that. We are going to go ahead and do our next coat, well, I guess our only other coat of primer. And again, we want to keep with the grain of the wood, which is going to be really challenging because of the dry air today. But by the way, since I did need to wash this in between doing the back side with primer and this side, so it's a little bit damp, which is not a problem because this is a water-based product. That's another reason why I like it. You don't have to use mineral spirits or anything like that to clean your brush. It's just soap and water cleanup, which is pretty awesome. I'm gonna start painting this side, and again, keep in mind you want to make sure that you don't have drips around the edges. Our whole reason for putting this up on a stand, more or less. So I want to just point out that you could see that whenever I did this part down here, I went side to side, so against the grain of the wood, but I quickly came back and brushed with the grain of the wood before the primer started to dry so that the brush strokes go in the right direction. And anywhere that I'm doing my best anyways, to anywhere that I happen to get the wrong direction of brush strokes, I am doing my best to quickly correct that with the right direction so that we don't have brush strokes fighting wood grain in our end product. I checked all around the edges. I think everything looks pretty well covered. There's a couple of little flaws that I accidentally made as I was painting because this primer is drying so quickly. But everything is covered, so I will sand out those little flaws tomorrow, and we're going to leave this for the day. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and take this opportunity to seal your primer back up so that it'll be fresh and ready for next time. Make sure that all of these edges are even. And also, you should have a clean brush, so either hang your brush so that the bristles are down and it can fully dry and water doesn't stay up here where the bristles attach, because it will deteriorate that glue and cause your bristles to fall out sooner, and when you have a nice brush you don't want to do that. But if you don't have a place to hang it, you can also just create a little ramp for it, and that ramp must be there we go. Create a little ramp for it so that it has a downward angle, so that the water can drain out the correct direction and not deteriorate that glue up there. For the actual painting process of this, since we have done our one coat of primer, you only want one, I have moved to a part of my workshop where I can actually shut the doors and shut the weather out, because it's supposed to get nasty in the next couple days. I'm going to give you a little bit of info while I open up my paint and stir it. So I am using a satin finish paint for my cabinets. I am doing this because it's in a high traffic area, and really for something like the kitchen where you want to be able to clean grease and fingerprints and all that stuff off of your cabinets, your furniture, or whatever, you really don't want to use anything with any less of a gloss than satin. Now if you're doing something that's in not such a high traffic area, you can definitely choose to use a slightly lower gloss if you want to. So this is going to take several days, and you have a couple of options here because the paint will develop a skin within a couple of hours. You can put on a coat in the morning and another coat in the evening, or you can just do one coat a day and call it done, and just know that you're going to have more days of working on this. Either way, slow and steady. You know that slow and steady wins the race? Yeah, well that's true here. Slow and steady makes you a very nice finished product in the end. So you want to do, again, just like we did, a fairly thin coat of primer. You want to keep all of your paint coats thin. Don't load your brush up with a huge quantity of paint, because you'll just develop drips. You'll have an uneven layer. You'll have puddling. It's just not It's just much better to do more thin coats of paint. And that goes whenever you spray paint too, right? Whenever you do your paint, just like with your primer, it is important that you go ahead and paint with the grain of the wood. So whichever direction the wood appears to be flowing, that's the direction you want to paint. And you notice that I still have my door elevated, so I can make sure that I don't get drips on the corners, or on the edges, excuse me, not just the corners. Another thing that you will want to remember is, again, always wash your brush out after each time that you paint. You'll notice that I started on the back side again. I will actually be building up all the coats of paint on the back side of my door first, so basically completing the back side before I move around to the front side. It's really better to do that than to continuously flip the door and risk damaging one side or the other, but particularly to risk damaging the front side. That's the most important side, right? So I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm just going to paint, and we will zip through the next few days, but I will show you every single coat that I paint. Five coats later, and here we are. The back of this is finished. I actually could have stopped with 4 coats, but there was a little stain, something weird, that actually looked like a spider pooped on my door, and it wasn't coming off, so I just decided to go ahead and do a whole other coat. But 4 coats definitely would have done it. So now we can flip over and we can move to the carved side, which is the front side, which, as I mentioned before, I prefer to do the back side first, just in case I scar it up a little bit whenever I'm doing the front side. There's no good reason why I should scar it, but that's just always in the back of my mind, that the side that I'm going to be looking at the most, I don't want it to be lying face down for like a week while I do this other side. So whenever you do the carved side, you still want to do the same thing. You want to make sure, number one, that you get into all the little nooks and crannies and crevices. And you want to make sure that you get all of these carved pieces. And remember, don't do a big, thick, globby layer of paint. Do a really thin layer, because we're doing slow but steady. Now let's make sure you see where I got into this carved area right here, this indented area. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I get my brush strokes going in the direction of the wood grain. And one thing about this that you'll want to keep in mind, so I did not sand all the wood grain off of my door, because I actually like the way that it looks whenever you can see the grain of the wood through the paint. I don't mind knowing that these are painted wood cabinets. Now, if you would prefer not to see that wood grain, you can actually get that to go away. You're just going to have to sand and sand and sand until it goes away. And to be honest, the only time that the wood grain is particularly noticeable in the end product of this is when you're in certain lights. So I actually don't know that I think that it is really worth your time and effort to get rid of the wood grain. But if you come to the end of this and you really hate how it looks, well, you can always go back and sand it down and do it again. I'm right here in the home stretch of painting. I actually thought I only had one more coat to do on the front of this, and I see this flaw down in this corner that I had meant to sand out before I started doing my final coat of paint. I'm going to show you. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but it is right here, and it is fairly small, but it is something that I definitely notice. So since I am almost at my final coat, I thought I was at my final coat, this is an oh no moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 320 sandpaper, see 320, whoops, that was upside down, 320, and I'm going to sand very gently in that area. And you want to make sure that your paint is good and dry before you do this. Do not sand wet paint, because you will only wind up with tears in your paint, which will be your own, because you will make a giant mess if your paint is still wet. So I'm just sanding just a little bit here, very gently, and thankfully it looks like it's not taking much to get that flaw out. I saw that back whenever I did the priming and totally forgot to do anything about it. And now that I'm looking, there's another flaw right up here. I'm going to go ahead and sand that one down too. I mean, since I'm sanding, why not? Now this one looks a little worse. Like, actually, it looks like it may have been a flaw in the original finish on here, which I would have thought might have come out with my original sanding job. That seems to be knocking it down though. So I may need to put an additional coat of paint in those little sections that I just did. You know what, since I'm doing this, why not just pick out some of the other stuff that I'm seeing now? Just made a little hole there. If you pick out like a little grain of sand or something, you definitely want to give a little sanding treatment to that area, because otherwise you're going to have basically a little hole, and it's going to have an edge that's raised, because that is what happens whenever you pull a tiny piece of dirt out of your paint. It raises up the edge as it comes out, which is pretty rude, and then it leaves you with a hole. Okay, those were the only 3 spots. So I'm going to just take a little clean rag. In my case, I have a little piece of gauze, which I really like for this kind of thing, because it's clean, it's small, and it holds on to the dust really well. So a microfiber cloth might actually be a good choice in this case, because you're only getting a little bit of paint dust off of here. It's not a particularly dirty task. Let's see, I sanded that one pretty hard. I'm probably going to have to put an extra little coat or 2 right in there. But that's all you have to do, and you should be back on your way to doing your final or almost final coat. Ooh, how exciting. I have my door painted, looking lovely. I hope that you have your doors, your cabinets, your furniture, whatever it is that you're painting. I hope that you have successfully done that by now. You know, I know that we had that little hiccup where I had a flaw there at the end that I probably should have fixed beforehand, but I'm actually really glad that I forgot, so that you could see that even, you know, when you're still working, before you get to your final coat, you can sand on your door or whatever it is a little bit, and then put another coat of paint on it and it disappears. Now, if you had a little bit bigger of a flaw than I did, or deeper, you can definitely go back and just put some paint in that one spot if you still need to cover it. Right now is a good time to double check that you don't have any drips anywhere. And if you do, I would highly recommend going ahead and fixing those, because it's much easier to fix them now than when you get your doors actually on your cabinets or your furniture installed or whatever. And if you have any carved areas like this is a good place that likes to catch drips. Just double check that also. One thing to keep in mind These are not technically dry yet. Yes, you can touch them, you can handle them, you can install them, but they're very scarable right now, meaning that the paint can be easily scratched. Now, in about 3 weeks, when it's totally dry, the stuff is like a hard eggshell. It's not an eggshell finish, I got satin, but it's just like a hard shell on your doors, and it is really durable once it's totally dry. So just remember to be a little careful around it right here for a few weeks. I think that's all I've got for you today. I really appreciate you joining me and working on all this painting. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe now. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.